Thursday Q&A. Here we are again, second Thursday of the month, just like not quite always, but most of the time. Thanks to everybody for being here with us. And I'm going to start with a couple things like I always do. A big thank you to Tight Bond for sponsoring us and underwriting this. And we have got, I did a thing a while ago, which is woodworkers are always very interested in making picture frames. Part of the challenge with picture frames is you have to get 8 miters because there's 2 miters where this corner comes together, 2 miters where this corner comes together. So you've got to get 8 miters exactly perfect for a 4-sided picture frame to work. So I developed a no miter picture frame. If you scroll down just a little bit, you're going to see a spot where you can click and you can get the instructions for doing that no miter picture frame. It is, I believe, a very cool approach. And despite not being mitered, it looks, the aesthetics are good when you're done. And it's much easier to do than finessing your miter gauge, my table saw, or miter saw, my miter saw, and finessing those and getting the angles exactly right. So have a look at that stuff. Then I think we can dive in to questions. Miranda asks, I missed it, exclamation point. I'm going to ask this question anyway. So I don't know what, oh, maybe she means she's not watching live. I have a weld steel cart on wheels, 32 inches by 44. I'm making a kitchen island out of it. I bought a piece of butcher block for that. I was storing old tabletops on the shelf of the cart, just took them out and washed them. They're antique cherry. One is 19 by 46, one piece of wood, gorgeous. So my question is, would it work to somehow piece these tabletops together and finish them? They're 1-inch thick boards. So your cart is 32 by 44, making an island. And you've got these cherry tops that are 19 by 46. So yeah, I mean, you can always glue little pieces together to make big pieces. So I don't see in here where you might say how big you want the top of the island to be when you're done, but you can certainly glue 2 of the existing tops together. That's 19 and 19, it'd be 38. That'd give you a 38 by 46, and then cut it to whatever final size you need. It's unusual. We commonly think of edge jointing boards. It's less mainstream to butt joint boards, but people do it. And I'll show you in case that isn't patently clear. So just with this scrap, if I do this with dust, I'm edge jointing. If I do this, I'm butt jointing. So here, when we do this, which would be long grain to long grain, if you clean up that edge, you clean up that edge and glue them together, it's going to be very, very strong. With this, it's end grain. So you'd want to get a really good quality cut on both of these. And when you put them together this way, if that's what you're looking to do to make it longer, then you would need some reinforcement in there. Dowels, dominoes, biscuits would be okay, not great. The difference being with biscuits, you don't get a lot of penetration into each of the mating pieces. Dowels and dominoes would give you much greater reach into each of the 2 mating pieces. So yes, on all counts, you can glue little pieces to make big pieces. If you're, oh, next question, Miranda goes on to say, I have enough boards to make it 2 inches thick and plenty wide. No idea where to start on that. So if you're looking to do this, a face lamination, step 1 is you've got to get these surfaces cleaned up. If you know anyone that's got a drum sander, or if you own a drum sander, that's a really good way to get those faces nice and flat so you can turn 1-inch stuff into 2-inch stuff. For me, sequence of events, I would build up the thickness first. Then if you want to make a bigger thing when you're done, if you want to do an edge glue up or a butt joint like we just talked about, then I would do that after the 2-inch buildup is done. Christopher says, template routering around a curved end. I'd like a panned out view to see how an expert adjusts the boards to avoid it spitting back at him or her, or gauging, maybe means gouging, the wood. Grain diagrams make it more confusing without see the actual process big picture. So, template routing. So template routing is you've got a pattern, and I'm trying to think if I have anything laying nearby. I don't believe I do. You've got a pattern, and the pattern is finish size. The pattern is somehow attached, double face tape, screws, whatever it is attached to your target piece. And then you're using one of two bits, a pattern style bit or a flush trim bit, in order to have the bearing ride the template and the cutters take away anything that's sticking out. So you end up with a component that's exactly the same size and shape as the template. Where people, in my experience, typically go wrong with this is they do a couple different things. One is try to take too much material off. Flush trimming and pattern cutting work really, 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 really well. You can't, especially on end grain on a curve, if you're trying to take off a 1/4 inch, that's too much. You really need to, in the first step, where you're rough cutting the board to get it close to the template, you've got to get it really close to the template. On end grain cuts, I'd like to see that certainly no more than 1/8 of an inch. And if you get to a 1/16 of an inch, that would be not just better, but way more better. That's going to help. The other thing is that people have a tendency to make a pattern, and then what they're trying to do is, like, just from space on a router table, approach that pattern again with their flush trim or their pattern style bit, and approach it and just kind of walk into it and start cutting. It's probably going to catch and tear on you. A couple things can help this. One is most router tables come with a starter pin. This is what starter pins are all about, is starting on that pin and then easing into the cut instead of just launching into the cut. So using a starter pin is going to make it better. Whenever you can, we use, in a chair making class I do, we use a pattern in order to make the legs of the chair, the back legs of the chair. That pattern is about 2 inches longer than the leg we're cutting. So what's nice about that is the bearing of the router bit is on the pattern before it engages with the material. And that makes everything more solid. It makes it way easier to do the pattern routing. So whenever you can, when you make the template such that it gives you a runway to ease into the cut and then start going. So it's a couple things. Make sure you're really minimizing the amount of waste that projects past the pattern. No more than 1/8, 1/16 inch would be better, especially on those end grain cuts where it's catchy. Material choice is another part of this. Open grain woods, red oak would be an example. When you go across the end grain, they're going to be more likely to give you tear out and catches. Closed grained woods, less so. So a maple or cherry or walnut would be less prone to catching like that than a pine or oak would. So material choice is part of that. And then give yourself, like I said, a runway landing pad if you can when you're easing into the cut. Burl asks, why don't you change the videos on Craftsy channel? You don't say what that means. I don't know what that means. So, Burl, if you're still watching, let us know what that means. I have no idea what you're talking about with changing the videos. Jonathan says, what are the guidelines for when to use staples or pin nails or brad nails? Great question. For me, if I am in, well, I don't know, I was going to say in broad strokes, but not too broad. In sort of broad strokes, I use staples anytime I'm in man-made material, if I can. So a staple, of course, has a bigger head. It's more obvious when you're done. But if I use a brad in man-made material like plywood or particle board or MDF, the head of the brad is so small, and that material, softer isn't quite the right word, but it gives more readily. So it's more likely that the head of that brad is going to pull through. So certainly in man-made materials, whenever I can get away with it, meaning I don't mind the staple head showing, I use a staple. So certainly in the case of putting a cabinet back on, the back of the cabinet's going to be up against a wall. Nobody's ever going to see the crown of that staple. That's a great application for a staple instead of a brad. And it's going to give you a lot better holding power. The other spot there would be thin material. It's the same thing. As material gets thinner, it doesn't have as much holding power. So that small head on a brad, or certainly no head on a 23 gauge pinner, you just don't have any bite into that material. So again, if you can, with the aesthetics, if you can use a staple instead, do that. My other spot for that would be in softer woods. I just did a project in cedar this week, and that got stapled instead of brads, stapled and glued. And again, the reason for that is with that soft wood, with cedar, that crown of the staple is going to have a much better bite in the material than a brad would. So soft woods, man-mades, thin woods, when the aesthetic allows it, I go to a staple instead of a brad or a nail. Steve says, not specifically woodworking, but it involves wood. Any suggestions for a deck sealer? Oh, this is, well, I'll finish here, but this is for a deck I built as a foundation of a greenhouse I built. So most of it will be indoors, quotation marks. It does get very hot in there and there'll be water on it. Yeah, I don't know. When I make something for outside, like the cedar planters that live outside the shop here, and we have a few of them at the house, they're all sealed just with Thompson's water seal. And I've had good success with that. I'm not reapplying it on the cedar every year, probably every other year. But here's what I would do. Wherever you live, because environment affects this stuff, wherever you live, I would go to a good finishing store. So not the paint department at a big box store, but Hirschfield's, Sherwin-Williams, and ask them this same question. And the reason I'm saying where you live is because if you're in Phoenix and I'm in Wisconsin, there's a pretty good chance that environmental conditions are different enough that the finish recommendation for anything that's going to be outside, even though you're in a greenhouse, but anything that's going to be kind of outside, those recommendations are going to be different for Phoenix than for Western Wisconsin because the environment is so different. So I would check with a finishing company in your area that's going to be more familiar with your environment. I lost my place. Sorry. Rob says, looking for recommendations, investing in a durable, mid-price stationary router table for small projects. So this stuff being tool recommendations, I'm always a little hinky on. The reason being, I haven't tool tested. At WWGOA, we don't do tool tests. Other magazines do. So one thing out of this would be in Google, look for a tool test of router tables. And if it was done by Woodworker's Journal, Popular Woodworking, Wood Magazine, what's great about that is it's an objective approach to looking at those router tables, table saws, dust collectors, whatever it is. When you do this, you want to be careful, because what I've seen a lot of is websites where they review a product and they're not, when you read it and you read it in depth, you read it carefully, what you'll come to see is that they're not really reviewing the tools, they're just listing the tools. And with each tool, it'll say, get the price on Amazon, get the price on Amazon. What they're really trying to do is get you to click on Amazon affiliate links, because then if you buy the tool, they get a portion of the money spent on the tool. So you want to look at that stuff and make sure they've really evaluated it. They've given you objective reviews. Years ago, I was approached by a writer who wanted to submit a bandsaw tool test to WWGOA. And not only was it not a tool test, but the specs in it were incorrect. I didn't use any of their data because it was clearly they were just trying to drive traffic to affiliate links. It was not an objective tool test. For me, with a router table, I currently have a Harvey router table in my shop. I love it. It's very robust. I couldn't be happier with it. It's dead flat. Historically, I've had great success with Harvey, Craig, Rockler's router table. SawStop makes a great little benchtop router table. Jessam, it's been a while since I've used a Jessam, and their products have changed a little bit over time, but the Jessam stuff I used was always great. So what was that? Harvey, Jessam, Rockler, short memory. Harvey, Jessam, Rockler. Who else did I just say? SawStop. So there are a few options for you. Lee asks, can the bottom bearing be removed from a dual bearing trim router bit? I only need the top bearing for most of my projects. Most seem to either be bottom or dual. Oh, that's an interesting question. So let me do a little show and tell in case you're not clear on what Lee is pregunting, what Lee is asking. One sec. And I'll give you a couple examples. Switch cameras for you. Water and router bits. Here's what we have. What Lee is asking about is this one. With the question being, can the bottom bearing come off? Generally, yes, because usually there's a stop collar like this one has. So there's an Allen screw right there. If you take that Allen out, this stop collar should slide off of the shaft of the router bit and the bearing should slide off. And then that would turn this into from a dual bearing bit to a flush trim bit. This is a flush trim bit. This is a pattern bit. When the bearing is on the shank side of the cutter, that's a pattern bit. When it's at the end of the cutter, that's a flush trim. I'm surprised to read in your question that most seem to be this or this. In my experience, flush trim is more prevalent than either of these. So I don't know, certainly I've bought a lot of router bits at Woodcraft and Rockler, Amazon, and I would, if you're online, jump on those sites, look for flush trim, which gives you the bearing on the end. And I've never had a problem buying a new flush trim router bit. So you can do that. And then as I showed you on that cutter, if whatever bit you own right now is set up the same as that one, you should be able to remove an Allen screw, slide off the stop collar, slide off the bearing, and then have a flush trim. Part of the question of the day would be, why bother? I don't get where having the bearing where it is on a dual bearing bit would give you a problem. But if for whatever you're trying to do, you can't have the bearing there, the other thing is remove it or just look for a flush trim. Paul asks, there are some nice table lamps I can make of wood for a craft sale. However, I'm a bit cautious about selling them due to the wiring. Even though it's a simple light switch, what if is a concern? Any thoughts? Well, it's quite possible I am the worst person to ask about this because I am extremely, extremely, extremely cautious about this kind of thing. And there's a lot involved here. So when, like a couple months ago, we had Ryan as a guest with us, and Ryan talked a lot about if you're trying to monetize your business, different things you can make, different ways you can monetize your woodworking shop. So one of the things that also came out of that is people got to be really careful about if you're just plunking away in your garage making stuff, hobby, and then you start making stuff you're selling, this conceivably can get you in a world of hurt. And again, I probably, because I've been teaching woodworking for 40 years, my brain defaults to the worst case scenario, which would be you make a gizmo and somebody somehow gets hurt using your gizmo. You've been doing this as a hobby in your shop. Now you sold this thing. Do you own product liability insurance? Does your homeowner's insurance, your everyday homeowner's insurance, know that you're monetizing the stuff that you have in your garage or your basement? In a case like this, I would be super squeamish, Paul, if it were I. And wiring or not, if you're selling stuff at a craft sale, again, worst case scenario, somebody chokes on a thing you made, somebody drops it on their toe and decides they're going to sue you, somebody, whatever. Now you're introducing something that's got wiring in it. That can really add a wrinkle to this. So a great question would be, call your insurance agent and say, if I do this one, so I can tell you for me, I maintain product liability because I make and sell wooden items. I cannot make and sell anything for a kid or a ladder or a step stool. So I have no intention of making ladders and step stools, but clearly the line in the sand there is anything that somebody would climb on, I would not have coverage for that. Anything, I can't make kids' toys because I don't have coverage for that. But my product liability covers basically anything else I do. So it's a great question, and I'm very, very glad you're asking the question and you're aware of a concern over this, because I think a lot of people just jump in and they start selling stuff without paying attention to the what if. And I think, as I said, I tend to be way overly cautious probably on the what if, but knock on wood, I've never had a claim against me. I've never had any litigation. And I think part of that is because I'm super, super, super careful about making sure I'm protected. So, great question. Harold asks, what's the general rule of thumb for cutting project parts oversize? 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Name that movie. It depends. If I am, if I'm in some commodity wood, red oak, pine, I don't know, even most of the North American hardwoods, when we do the cabinet making class in here, and we start with random width, random length, red oak, I tell the students to rough cut their stuff 1 inch oversize or more when they're in that prep stage. So prep stage is we're grabbing 8-foot long stuff. We're just chunking it down to what they're going to need for face frame styles, what they're going to need for face frame rails, blah, 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 blah. So we're shooting for everything to be 1 inch long. Part of that is going to come back to what we're doing next. So as we move forward with those pieces, eventually one end is going to get cut square. The other end is going to get cut to bring it to its final length. When you use a miter saw, you're going to get your best cut quality on the miter saw by the blade being captured on both sides. So a thing I teach, and I'm sure I've said it in a bunch of videos, is whenever possible, you want to try to not just skin end grain, you want to cut the end grain, meaning you want the blade captured on both sides, which reduces its opportunity to deflect. If you're only cutting on one side and it's a really hard wood, it's possible that the blade deflects just a little bit and you don't get the nice cut. You don't get the dead straight end that you're hoping to get, that you're shooting for. So if we're going to cut such that we're captured on both sides, we need enough wood on end number one to do a squaring cut, rotated end for end, enough wood remaining on end number two that we can do the exact same thing. So that's part of the justification for us shooting for 1 inch over. If I'm, as an individual, I'm working with something where the tolerances are tight, you know, and the piece I have to work with is really close to what I need as a finished size, then I might dial that back. If it's $25 a board foot ebony, I might dial that back. But in most cases, it's somewhere around an inch. Neil very nicely says, George, thanks for these programs. I learned from you and appreciate your wisdom. Thank you for calling it wisdom. We're about halfway through, which is incredible. You got a lot of questions today, which is great because it keeps us moving. So again, a couple just bookkeeping things. No miter picture frame. If you scroll down just a little bit, the instructions on how to make that are available there. Click, grab it. It's weirdly exactly what it sounds like. It's going to give you a chance to make a picture frame without having to cut any miters. It's a really, I think, a very cool technique for that. And then, sorry, also, as always, big thank you to Tight Bond. Sorry, I'm cutting their sign off, but a big thank you to Tight Bond for sponsoring our Thursday Lives. Neil, possibly the same Neil, says, I'm going to make oyster veneer from an orange tree. And I don't know if that means you're veneering over oysters, which would be interesting. The diameter of the branch is about 6 inches. I have access to green wood and some that is dry, which is better to cut and use. Assuming I will use a bandsaw on a sled, what blade would you recommend? My default blade is a 2 to 3 TPI 1-inch carbide blade. Do you dry the slices in a particular way with spacers or paper between them? Any other suggestions on doing this end grain veneer? So maybe I've never heard the term oyster veneer, but maybe the last part of the question answers that, which is it's end grain. So bunch of good questions here. What Neil is looking to do, what Neil is fixing to do, is to cut cookies, to do little log rounds from these 6-inch branches. So the problema with that typically is that when you cut wood in that direction, let me get a cheat thing. When you bake cookies, and I don't mean baking, but when you cut them like Neil is describing, we run into a big problem. And the thing is, as they dry, they really tend to go kerflooey, technical term. So here's what we've got. Sorry that took so long. We're going to cut a cross section, and in the center of that is the pith. And then that's surrounded by heartwood, that's surrounded by sapwood. The density in the middle is not the same as the density out here. So typically, as these things dry, they develop these cracks and they can be significant, like huge pie-shaped cracks, depending on how much internal stress this ends up with. One way to get around that is with a product treated chemically. The product is called pentacryl. We've done a lot of video. I've used this stuff in a lot of videos. Pentacryl is available at woodworking stores. It's available online. It's a chemical. What it does is it soaks into the pores of the wood, soaks into the cells of the wood. And if you think of the cell like sort of like an egg, then that pentacryl soaks into the shell of the egg and rigidifies it, probably not a word. It makes the wall rigid. So when that cookie dries and moisture leaves that cell, the wall of the cell no longer has the opportunity to shrink and collapse. It's collapsing, shrinking, that over time causes the cracking. So what one would do in this case, to go back to your question, is you cut them all green. Then you soak them in pentacryl while they're green. And I'm going to say then when we get to blade choice, because you're going to have a lot of subsequent steps, a 2 to 3 tooth blade, TPI blade, it's pretty aggressive, but you're going to have to go back and clean all this stuff up after you're done with the pentacryl. So it's going to soak in the pentacryl for some period of time. When you go to Pentacryl's website, there's a schedule there, and it'll say, for this kind of wood that's this thick, you need to allow it to soak this long, because that's what's going to give you complete saturation. That's what you have to have, is complete saturation. So you're going to use that schedule, get the saturation time, then they're going to come out of there, and then you're going to send them through a drum sander. You're going to do something to clean up all those faces. So the fact that you're using that 2 or 3 TPI blade and aggressive cut, not a great surface finish, isn't a big deal, because those faces are going to have to get cleaned up after the pentacryl step. I'm not sure. I would say with Osage orange, it's a really, really, really dense wood. I've got a chunk of it here, and not in cookie form, in slab form, monster big crack. I think if you don't do this preemptive strike with the pentacryl, you're going to get significant cracks, because it's so dense that as those cells dry, there's going to be a lot of internal pressure, and you're going to get cracks in these oysters. You're going to get cracks in these cookies. So I would do a couple things. One would be, I would do some Googling or go to woodworking forums and see if anyone else has done this with Osage orange, because I'm giving you my best spitball guess, but maybe somebody else has already cracked this nut, worked with Osage orange, and figured this out. But if what I think is true, then yes, you need a sled so the log doesn't roll as you're cutting it. I think your blade choice, carbide blade against that Osage, is a good idea, because Osage orange is very, very hard. So make a sled, do your slices. Then I think you're going to need to soak everything in a tub full of pentacryl. And then after the soaking is done, go to the next step, which is cleaning them up. I'm kind of rereading the question fast to make sure I answered everything. William says, if you want to sand a piece of wood that's been textured, such as with the CNC, between coats of aquathane, how would you sand it? I have the perfect thing for that. So we got this thing, and we have this thing. And I'll switch cameras. So the walnut thing is textured, and it wasn't done on a CNC. This was actually done with an ArborTech carver, but see the texture across there? And this has a coat of finish on it. This has a coat of aquathane on it. So between coats, I used this. Isn't that cool? Those are all little fingers of sandpaper. It's a 6-inch disc. See the number? This is 240 grit. I have another one just like this, but different, 120. Another one just like that, but different, 180. This is from Klingspor. So when you go on the Klingspor website, your search is mop sanders, M-O-P, mop sanders. And it's easier. I use these a lot. So I have 3 mandrels with a different grit on each mandrel. Then when you run this, what's cool with this is it's like a buffing wheel. When you go to sand this textured surface, those fingers are actually going to go into the texture. Same thing I use when if I've done any kind of relief carving on the CNC. So I'm looking for an example. There's nothing right here, but a relief carving where I've left an image raised or letters raised, I use the mop sander to clean that up before I put finish on. They're very, very, it's a very, very handy thing to have in the shop. You can use it on a portable drill, or you can mount it in a drill press and then use it like a buffing wheel. And of course, that's spinning in the drill press, just run your project over it. They're also great. We used a bunch of years ago, we did some cabriole leg stuff, and the flutter sander, the mop sander, was shown as a way to sand cabriole legs as well. Herb says, George, please discuss your experience and thoughts using a French cleat to hang a floating entertainment center to a wall, 72-inch long, 20 inches deep, 24 inches tall, good or bad idea? So if you're not familiar, a French cleat is, we put a cleat on the wall, the top of the cleat has been cut at 45 degrees. In whatever the thing that we're hanging is, we put a cleat, also cut at 45 degrees. The 45 is going the other way, so that when you put the cabinet over the cleat on the wall, it engages. And that's how you hang the thing. So I really I have one experience doing this. And that is in my old shop, on one wall, there were 12 feet of pine cabinets, 3 sub-assemblies. So 3 4-foot long, 16-inch deep face frame cabinets. The case of the cabinet was MDF. And then face frame doors. The doors weren't on when I installed them. Because when I'm by myself, I work alone, I was looking for a way to easily get these big cabinets hung on the wall. There were no lowers below them. So if you've got lowers, you can cheat, because you can install the lowers first and then use blocking to put the other cabinets in place. In this case, I didn't have that. So what I did is I used French cleats so that I could put a French cleat on the wall, get it level. That French cleat was a little bit shorter, maybe an inch shorter than the inside dimension of the cabinet. Then I could take this big 16-inch deep, 4-foot long MDF cabinet, lift it, boom, set it on the cleat, and that was up here somewhere at head height. Once it was engaged on the cleat, then it would just hang there. The reason that the cleat on the wall was shorter than the cabinet is then I had lateral adjustment. So remember, in this case, I had 3 cabinets. So I put the middle one up first, then I did the left one, and with the lateral adjustment, I could push it over until it kissed against the middle one. Then I did the right one, I could push it over until it kissed against the middle one, and in that case, it worked great. Then in addition to the French cleat, in the back of the cabinet on the bottom, there was a screw rail that got screwed to the wall. So it's not only suspended on the French cleat when it's all done, it's also got that bottom to grab it and retain it. So in that case, it worked great, 72 inches long. So you've got a big cabinet there. You need a few more pairs of hands to hang it, but I think it should work fine for what you're looking to do. Net weight, your 72 by 20 by 24 probably weighs about what my 48 by 48 by 16 weighed. So yeah, I think it'll work for you. Ian says, your Christmas tree candy dish, you suggest using spray adhesive on the pattern so it'll bond. How do you remove the adhesive after peeling the paper off and still keep the wood food safe? You could wipe it down with a solvent. Denatured alcohol would be a choice for that. And then once that's flashed off, sand that, seal over the top of it with whatever your sealer is. The other thing you could do, I don't specifically remember that project. If you put the pattern on the back, then you don't care so much, right? Glue the pattern to the back of the project instead of the front of the project. Gregory asks, oh, this is cool. I'm signed up for your Shaper Origin class in Connecticut. I'll talk more about that in a second. Do we all get to work with the Origin, or is it mainly show and tell? No, this is crazy cool. So coming up in October, I'm at the Connecticut Valley, shoot, I'm having a brain blank on the name. Connecticut Valley School of Fine Woodworking. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. I know the cabinet making class and the router table class, they're already full. I think the Origin class is close to full. So to answer Gregory's question, in this case, what happens with the Origin class is we get 4 Origin setups, which is the Shaper Origin, the handheld CNC, and a workstation for 8 people. So everybody pairs up, and then this is hands-on. There are 3 or 4 exercises that everybody goes through. So person number 1 in the team cuts a push stick out first, then person number 2 does that while person number 1 helps them through it, and then same thing. We just do the same thing. So it's completely hands-on, and everyone in the class does every step of every project on the Origin that they're using. So you get the whole thing completely hands-on. So again, if you're interested in that, like I said, I'm very sure the cabinet making and router table sold out months ago. The Origin, I haven't looked for a while. The Origin, I'm not sure of. Dennis says, on that frame, do you use glue only or also small nails? So is this the no miter picture frame? I think that's the one where it's all just glued together. I'm pretty sure. I think it's all just glued. On the miter topic, what are your thoughts of cutting all the ends at once? So on cutting miters, yeah, if you can, I mean, anytime pointing to my miter saw, I can pad cut parts. I can stack them and cut them all at one time. I will, as long as I know it's not costing me accuracy somewhere along the road. Diane says, just want to say, I'm a new woodworking teacher for grades 9 through 12. Good for you. That's cool. So that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. If you're watching, Dan, I went to school to get my tech ed degree, and then as programs phased out, so that was, I had my degree in like 82-ish. As programs went out, it was very hard for me to find a teaching job. I absolutely watch your videos first. Any advice on your favorite project, large collaboration projects? I have 8 students per section. I teach 3 sections. We made your birdhouses 4 years ago, and they're still going strong. So a friend of mine, my college roommate, taught 32 years in public schools. He did, here in high school, he did boats in middle school. Now, that being said, he's got a little bit of a boat building background, but there are some pretty simple glue and stitch boats. And then when they were done, the class, I believe, would build 1 or 2 per class. And that was everything, the plywood, the fiberglass, the whole deal. And then they would sell them at the end of the class and then use the money for the department. So that could be cool. If you want to look into that, you could research that. Large collaboration projects. Are you doing any construction stuff? Because that's small sheds that's a great group project where you're framing walls and framing rafters and doing that. I don't know. I would have to stew on it. It's a long time since I personally have been in front of high school students, but look on Chris Lyons was teaching high school shop, and he did, I think we did it as a live stream. Maybe Jess, if you could find that link and put it in the comments. We specifically did projects for kids. Chris did. And he provided 2 or 3 or 4 plans that you're free to use. So you could have a look at those as well and see if there's anything there that appeals to you. Mike says, generally speaking, after how many hours of use should bandsaw and table saw blades be cleaned? Can you summarize similar maintenance needed for thickness planers? So I don't think it's in hours. I think it's a what are you cutting? On my table saw blade, I'm primarily in hardwoods in here. So I don't get a lot of sap buildup like you would get from pine on my cutting tools, whether that's router bits, table saw blades, bandsaw blades. I just don't get a lot of pitch and resin buildup. So what you really want to do, it's not an hours thing. It's pay attention to the performance and look at the cutter. The performance would be if your feed rate drops way off, if you're burning, that would be more of a table saw than a bandsaw or a router bit, you'd get burning. Then do a visual inspection and see if you've got a lot of sap buildup, resin buildup on there, and clean the cutter. And then try it again. And if you're still getting bad performance, then it's probably dull and needs to be sharpened. But the cleaning can have a huge positive effect because what the resin does, it builds up on the sides. It's actually rubbing against the material. If it builds up enough, you don't have clearance for the cutter, and that's what's causing the burning. So yeah, it's not really a time thing. On your planer, I would pay attention. Again, if you work a lot with pine, look at the feed rollers, and you can get a buildup of resin on there. Part of the byproduct of that can be when the material comes out, it's been surfaced, but it's got dimples in it. And that can be from high spots being left, especially benchtop planers where you've got polyurethane or rubber rollers. My planer's steel rollers, it's less likely to happen. But what happens there is the stuff that's left on the rollers leaves impressions in the material that you're planing. So again, watch for performance there and then clean accordingly. All right, we have about 10 minutos left. We got time for a couple more. Linda says, I'm pretty new to woodworking. I'm working on a whirly gig. For my first one, I'm using plywood and pine I have in the shop. Once I have successfully made a whirly gig, I want to make some for gifts for my kids. They'll put out in their yards. What should I use? Boy, I would find a whirly gig person and ask them this question, because I think you need stuff that's lightweight. You need it to be relatively not free, right? So it's strong. If I were to make a guess, I would guess that cedar could be a good choice for that. It's lightweight. It can live outside. If you're painting these things, it paints pretty well, holds paint pretty well. But I would feel better if you found somebody who made a thing out of making whirly gigs. Whirly gigs. Thought I was saying it wrong. And ask them the same question, because I think it's material choice could be critical in a bunch of different ways for those. So not to pawn it off, but it's just not an area I have background in. Bill says, I built the Adirondack chairs from the pattern. Local stores only carry 3/4 inch cedar, makes for a lighter chair, but seems fine. Would you suggest filling the screw holes with dowels to prevent water problems, or are we just using the water seal product? So The problem with that chair and screws is that, like on the arms, I'm not as worried about the seat because the seat's slats have some angle to them. But on the arms where they sit dead horizontal, if you run screws down, now you've got a pocket there where water can sit. So yes, it would be more better if you counterbore that screw a little bit so that you could plug over the top of it. That would be the best scenario. That being said, I think the Adirondack chairs on our porch have been living completely outside for 10 years, maybe more. I'm not very good at maintaining them, and we still sit in them all the time. So they have held up with sealer I put on them when I first made them. Maybe I refreshed that cedar once or twice in 10 years, but not religiously. And they're living outside all the time in Wisconsin summers and Wisconsin winters. So best case scenario, plug over the screw head. If you're not able to do that and you just seal over everything, you're going to be mostly okay. James says, et cetera, said by Willy Wonka and Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. Possibly, I'm way more familiar with, now I'm blanking on the movie, Yul Brynner and The King and I. And when he was learning English, then he learned from, I'll remember the actress's name in an hour, but he learned from her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So whenever he was like giving a command, he'd be like, whatever. And my children shall go and do this, et cetera, et cetera. So that's actually what I was thinking of. Oh, there, David got The King and I. There we go. Jim Taylor, we're sneaking up on our last couple questions. Building a 4-foot tall, 6-foot long French cleat wall with 3/4 inch oak plywood. Wondering how tall you would make the cleats and how much space between each cleat. Had so many opinions on this, from 2-inch to 5-inch size cleats, from 3 to 6 inch. So also, I can use my track saw or table saw for the cuts. Which would you use? So I think what Jim is doing, we talked about French cleats earlier, hanging a cabinet. I think what he's doing is like, where I have my pegboard, for instance, he's talking about French cleating an entire wall. And what's cool about this is it gives you 11 billion options over time. Like, I put all these French cleats up, and then I make this thing that is a French cleat hanger for my router. And I can put it any place I want. And when I change my mind later, I can move it to a different French cleat. So it's a really cool idea because it gives you so much flexibility over time. As far, you're not committed to, it's like having pegboard. You're not committed to having your stuff in a specific spot. You can move it as you want to. So I understand the premise. I've never done it. I don't have any French cleat walls in here. I kind of think Matt Cremona may have done this in his old shop, not in his new shop. So I would look for somebody, a content creator, who has actively used French cleats in their shop. And like I said, I think Matt did in his old shop, and get that advice from them, because I'm not sure. There's probably some great rationale to the width of the cleats and then the vertical spacing so that it makes sense and it works. If I were ripping them, I would do this on my table saw. It would be, I think, far easier than doing it with a track saw, because one setup on the fence and you can rip. I would make it a table saw thing. Jim says, do you have any videos on setting up a Supermax drum sander, on tuning it? I've had drum sanders in my shop since day one of us doing videos. So I would use, on your computer screen, upper right-hand corner, there's a magnifying glass. That's search. So touch that, type in Supermax, and see what you get. I don't know for sure that we have or have not. I can neither confirm nor deny. How do you spell the product for end hardening? For end, what did we talk about? Hardening. I'm drawing a blank. John asks, map sander. So no, not this thing. Mop, like a floor mop, M-O-P. Some people like me also call it a flutter sander, but on Klingspor's website, search it as mop, M-O-P, mop sander. Jess has put up the links for Chris's live, which was called Woodworking with Kids, and you can grab those downloads there for all those projects. Also, have a look at the no miter picture frame. That's very cool. Get the link for that. And then, 459, last one. Suggestions on sanding sealer prior to painting, mostly for Baltic birch and a laser cutter, such as Christmas ornaments. So it would, my sealer of choice is Zinsser Seal Coat, which is de-wax shellac, is what it really is. But the product is called Zinsser Seal Coat. You can get it from Amazon, you can get it at paint stores. I buy it at Menards, a home center in my area, and you can put anything over it. You might want to do a little research about laser and having that in there prior to lasering, if that's what you mean. I know some stuff can give off fumes, like LP records can give off fumes that negatively affect a laser. So you might want to do some research on that. But my go-to sealer under my clear top coats, under paint, under epoxy is Zinsser Seal Coat. All right, folks, that's it. Out of time. Very busy, very aggressive class schedule for me over the next 2 or 3 months. I talked about I'm going to be at the Connecticut Valley School of Woodworking coming up in October. I'm going to be at the Klingspor store in Hickory. Look at their website. That's coming up in October. 2-day event, Friday, Saturday. I'm going to be at, other places. If you want to track that stuff, look at my website, georgevondriska.com. That'll give you my teaching schedule. Other than that, Jess behind the boards and I will see you here in a month for a spooky thing. We're going to do a special Halloween project. You don't want to miss that. It's a pretty cool project. We'll have that available for you. And then, other stuff between now and then. So that's it. Thanks for joining us tonight. Jess, you can punch us out. Peace.